You're filling out a background check form. Standard procedure, employment, passport renewal, doesn't matter. You write down where you were born, city, state, hospital name if you remember it, simple information, mundane, the kind of detail that means nothing. Except to someone, somewhere, it means everything. Imagine there's a list, a classified database, not of criminals or suspects or security threats, a list of ordinary Americans, flagged at birth, monitored across their entire lives. Not for what they've done, not for who they know, but for where they were born. Specifically, which hospital. Now forget everything you think you know about government surveillance, because buried in the CIA's operational archives, hidden behind layers of classification that have never been lifted, there's a program that's been running since 1947. A program that tracks Americans born in specific hospitals between 1880 and 1930. Thousands of people, their descendants, their medical records, their movements, their careers, all monitored, all documented, all classified, not because of anything they did, because of where they first drew breath. The hospitals have names you'd recognize if you lived in those cities. Pittsburgh's Allegheny General, Chicago's Cook County, San Francisco's St. Mary's, Philadelphia's Jefferson, dozens of others, scattered across America, built in the same narrow window of time, sharing the same architectural characteristics, the same impossible engineering. And every person born in these buildings between 1880 and 1930 is on a list that the CIA still updates, still monitors, still refuses to explain. I found the first reference by accident, buried in a FOIA release, that had nothing to do with birth records. I'd requested documents about domestic surveillance programs from the 1950s, standard Cold War paranoia stuff, communist infiltration, loyalty investigations, the usual. The CIA released about 400 pages, heavily redacted, most of it exactly what you'd expect. Then, on page 287, a single paragraph that stopped me cold. Continue monitoring subjects identified through Hospital Oregon Protocol. Birth records 18880, 1930 remain primary identification vector. Current active subject count, 14,847. Descendant monitoring protocols remain in effect per 1952 authorization. Hospital Origin Protocol. Birth records as an identification vector. Nearly 15,000 active subjects. Descendant monitoring. The paragraph was isolated. No context before it. No explanation after it. Just a bureaucratic notation in the middle of a document about something else entirely, as if tracking people based on where they were born was the most normal thing in the world. I filed a follow-up FOIA request specifically about the Hospital Origin Protocol. Denied. Records exempt under national security provisions. I filed an appeal. Denied. Continued classification necessary to protect intelligence sources and methods. I tried a different approach. Filed requests for any documents mentioning specific hospitals by name. Allegheny General, Cook County Hospital, Jefferson Hospital. Requested birth record policies, medical facility histories, anything that might give me context. Mostly denials. A few releases so redacted they were meaningless. Entire pages of black bars with maybe a preposition visible here and there. But in one release, I found a memo from 1951, FBI to CIA, subject line, coordination, hospital origin, subject tracking. Most of it was redacted, but 3 sentences survived. Recommend consolidation of hospital origin monitoring under single agency authority, current FBI/CIA. Duplicate tracking, creates inefficiencies. Subjects born in identified facilities 1880, 1930, estimated at 187,000. Current survivors approximately 47,000. Descendants estimated 890,000. Identified facilities, nearly 200,000 people born in them over 50 years. Descendants approaching 1 million, all being tracked by multiple agencies for reasons important enough to require coordination at the highest levels. I sat in my home office, looking at that memo, and felt the ground shift beneath me. What could possibly justify tracking nearly 1 million Americans based solely on which hospital their parents or grandparents were born in? The National Archives reading room in College Park, Maryland, smells like old paper and preservation chemicals, and the quiet desperation of researchers who know they're looking for something that's probably been destroyed. I'd requested everything I could find on hospital construction in America between 1870 and 1890, building permits, architectural records, city planning documents, medical facility registrations. The archivist brought out cart after cart, dozens of boxes, hundreds of files. I started with Pittsburgh, Allegheny General Hospital. According to official histories, construction began in 1883. The building opened in 1886, a state-of-the-art facility, one of the first modern hospitals in America, designed by the architectural firm of William Metcalf. I found the building permits, filed in 1883 as expected. Permit applications describing construction of medical facility, with specifications for a 4-story brick building. Then I found the insurance records from 1887. The building described in those records was 7 stories tall, not 4, 7, with basement levels extending 40 feet below ground, with a footprint nearly twice the size specified in the building permits. I found photographs from 1888. The hospital looked old in those photographs. Not new, not recently completed. The stonework showed weathering. The copper roofing had developed patina that takes decades to form. Trees in the courtyard were mature, at least 30 or 40 years of growth. A hospital supposedly built in 1883, 1886, photographed in 1888, looking like it had been standing for half a century. I cross-referenced the architectural firm, William Metcalf. His record showed he'd designed additions to Allegheny General in 1883, 1886. Not the original structure, additions. But the official history said he'd designed the entire building. I pulled records for Cook County Hospital in Chicago. Official construction dates, 1876, 1880. I found the building permits, found the architectural drawings, found photographs from 1882, same pattern. The permits described a 3-story building. The photographs showed 5 stories. The stonework looked weathered. The grounds looked established. Mature trees, settled foundations. A building supposedly completed in 1880, looking decades older in photographs from 1882. I went through hospital after hospital, Jefferson in Philadelphia, St. Mary's in San Francisco, Presbyterian in New York, Charity Hospital in New Orleans, Massachusetts General in Boston. Every single one showed the same discrepancy. Building permits for modest structures, photographs showing larger, older-looking buildings, official histories describing construction when the architectural records only documented additions or renovations or modernization. These hospitals weren't built in the 1870s and 1880s. They were already there, already standing, already old. The construction projects were just refurbishment, claiming existing buildings, updating them for modern use, and then writing histories that pretended they'd been built for nothing. I spent 6 days in those archives, photographed thousands of pages, building permits that didn't match the buildings, architectural drawings labeled renovation, that official histories called original construction, insurance records describing buildings larger and more complex than the permits should have allowed. And every single one of these hospitals, these pre-existing buildings that were claimed and relabeled in the 1870s to 1890s, was mentioned in that CIA memo about tracking people born in identified facilities. Allegheny General Hospital, Pittsburgh, present day. The building still stands in the North Side neighborhood, though it's been expanded many times. The original structure, the part that supposedly dates to 1886, forms the core of the modern complex. I walked around it on a cold morning in March, looking up at the stonework. The original facade is still visible, incorporated into later additions. The architectural style is distinctive, tall arched windows, elaborate stonework, a symmetry and precision that speaks to serious engineering capability. The official plaque near the main entrance says, Allegheny General Hospital, founded 1886, designed by William Metcalf. I photographed the plaque. Then I photographed the stonework above it. The stone was dark, almost black, in places, with the kind of weathering that comes from more than a century of industrial pollution and weather exposure. But the weathering pattern was uneven. The lower sections, supposedly the same age as the upper sections, showed significantly more erosion, as if the lower sections had been exposed to the elements for much longer before the building was enclosed and protected. I measured the window heights on the original facade. Ground floor to first floor, 14.2 feet. First floor to second floor, 13.8 feet. Second floor to third floor, 13.9 feet. Those aren't standard hospital floor heights for the 1880s. Standard hospital construction, from that era, used 2-foot floor heights. These ceilings were significantly taller, wasteful by 19th century standards, when heating such tall spaces would have been difficult and expensive. But they weren't wasteful if the building was designed for a different purpose originally. If it was built in an era with different construction standards, different heating technology, different architectural priorities. I tried to gain access to the basement levels. The hospital administrator was polite but firm. The sub-basements are maintenance areas, not open to the public. Insurance liability concerns. I'm doing historical research on the building, I explained. I just want to see the original foundations, take measurements, photographs. I'd need to see university credentials, a formal research proposal, liability insurance, approval from our legal department. I provided all of that, submitted a formal application, waited 6 weeks, denied. Unfortunately, we're unable to accommodate your request at this time. The areas you wish to access are integral to ongoing hospital operations and cannot be made available for historical research. The sub-basements of a 140-year-old hospital are integral to ongoing hospital operations, or they contain something the hospital doesn't want photographed. I walked the perimeter of the building, mapping the footprint. The original structure was larger than the building permits specified, significantly larger. The foundation extended at least 20 feet beyond what the 1883 permits should have allowed. That extra foundation wasn't added in 1883, it was already there. The building permits were for modifications to an existing structure, not construction of a new one, but the official history says otherwise, and access to the evidence that would prove the official history wrong is restricted. For insurance liability concerns, I started tracking down people who'd been born in these hospitals. Not the recent births, the old ones. The births that fell within that 1880-1930 window the CIA memo mentioned. Most of them were dead, of course. But some had children, grandchildren, people who might remember family stories, medical records, anything unusual about being born in these particular hospitals. I found Margaret Dennison in a nursing home outside Pittsburgh. She was 97, born in Allegheny General in 1927. Sharp, clear-eyed, skeptical of why some stranger wanted to talk to her about her birth. "Did your parents ever mention anything unusual about the hospital?" I asked. "Unusual how?" "Anything about the building itself, its age, its construction, the basement levels." She looked at me for a long moment. "Why would that matter?" "I'm researching the history of the building, trying to understand when it was really built. It was built in the 1880s. That's what everyone says. But did your parents ever suggest otherwise? Ever mention that it seemed older?" Another long pause. "Then my mother said once that the hospital felt ancient. She said the rooms in the maternity ward were too large, too tall, like they were built for a different purpose. She said the hallways in the basement, they took her down there for something. Some test. She said they seemed to go on forever, much deeper than a building should go." "Did she ever say anything else about those basements?" "She said there were areas that were sealed off, entire corridors with brick walls built across them. New brick," she said, "not original to the building. Like someone had deliberately closed off sections of the basement and didn't want anyone going down there." "When was this?" 1927. "When I was born." I showed her a photograph of the hospital from 1888. "Does this look like a new building to you?" She studied it carefully. "No, it looks old. The stone is dark, the trees are grown. You can see settlement in the foundation, the way it sits in the ground. That takes time." "How much time?" "I don't know. I'm not an architect, but more than a few years." I asked if she'd ever had unusual medical issues, unusual health monitoring, government interest in her medical records. Her expression changed, became cautious. "Why do you ask that?" "Have you?" "I've had more medical evaluations than seems normal. Every time I've applied for anything official. Passport security clearance, when my husband worked for Westinghouse, even just updating my driver's license. There are always questions about my medical history. Always requests for records, more than what they ask other people." "How do you know it's more?" "Because my husband was born in a different hospital, regular hospital built normally. And he never had the same questions, never had the same request for records. It was always just me. Because of where I was born." She leaned forward slightly. "Are you going to tell me why?" "I don't know why," I admitted. "But I'm trying to find out." "Good," she said. "Because I'd like to know before I die why the government has been asking about my health for 97 years. I found similar stories in Chicago, in Philadelphia, in San Francisco, in every city with one of these hospitals. People born in the identified facilities during that specific window, 1880 to 1930, reporting unusual levels of medical monitoring. Requests for records that seemed excessive, questions about health history that went deeper than standard background checks. Not everyone experienced it. Some people born in these hospitals lived normal lives with no unusual government interest, but enough reported the pattern that it couldn't be coincidence. And the pattern was specific. It wasn't everyone born in any hospital. It was people born in these particular hospitals. The ones with the architectural anomalies, the ones that were older than they claimed to be, the ones that the CIA was tracking through the hospital origin protocol. I started pulling birth certificates, thousands of them, from multiple states, from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, public records, available from state archives and genealogical databases. I created a database, tracked which hospital was listed on each certificate. cross-referenced with family histories, obituaries, anything that might indicate unusual government interest in that person's life. The pattern became clearer. People born in Allegheny General between 1880 1930, 23%, showed indicators of enhanced monitoring in later life. Security clearance delays, medical record requests, unusual bureaucratic attention. People born in other Pittsburgh hospitals during the same period, 3% showed similar indicators. People born in Cook County Hospital, Chicago, 1880 1930, 27%, showed enhanced monitoring indicators. People born in other Chicago hospitals during the same period, 4%. The pattern held across every city, every hospital. People born in the identified facilities were 6 to 8 times more likely to experience unusual government interest in their medical and personal records. And I started finding another pattern, a disturbing one: infant mortality rates. In the identified hospitals, Allegheny General, Cook County, Jefferson, St. Mary's, infant mortality rates during the 1880-1930 period were significantly lower than the national average. Not just a little lower, dramatically lower. In 1900, the national infant mortality rate was approximately 100 deaths per 1,000 live births. In Allegheny General, it was 34 per 1,000. In Cook County, 29 per 1,000. These hospitals had infant survival rates nearly 3 times better than the national average, better than any other hospitals in their respective cities, better than would be medically explainable given the technology and practices of the era. As if these buildings themselves somehow contributed to better outcomes, as if there was something about the physical environment that affected health, or as if whatever these buildings were originally designed for included systems that supported health in ways that standard hospitals couldn't replicate. Dr. Robert Chen, pediatric epidemiologist, lost his position at Johns Hopkins in 1998. I found him through old medical journals. He published a paper in 1996 titled Anomalous Infant Survival Rates in Pre-Modern American Hospitals, a Statistical Analysis. It documented exactly what I'd found. Certain hospitals had impossible survival rates given the medical knowledge and practices of their era. He'd concluded the paper with a call for further research into the architectural and environmental factors that might explain the anomaly. His tenure review the following year noted methodological concerns with his research. His position was not renewed. I found him teaching at a community college in Maryland. He was 64, cautious, initially unwilling to talk. That research ended my career at Hopkins, he said. I'm not interested in revisiting it. What if I told you the government has been tracking people born in those hospitals, that there's a classified program monitoring them? He looked at me steadily, then nodded slowly. That would make sense. How? Because the survival rates weren't just anomalous. They were impossible, statistically impossible. I controlled for every variable I could identify as socioeconomic factors, nutrition, maternal health, doctor training, sanitation practices. None of it explained the difference. He pulled out a worn folder from a filing cabinet, his personal copies of research that had never been published after that first paper. I started investigating the buildings themselves, the architecture, the materials used in construction, the ventilation systems, the acoustics. I found patterns. These hospitals, the ones with the anomalous survival rates, they all shared certain characteristics. He showed me his notes, detailed architectural analyses, floor plans, ventilation diagrams. The ceilings were too high, the rooms too large, the ventilation systems too sophisticated for the supposed era of construction. And the basements, every single one of these hospitals has extensive basement levels that are sealed off or restricted access. Why? I don't know. I never got access to them. Every hospital I contacted refused my request to examine the sub-basements, said they were maintenance areas, storage, not relevant to my research. But you think they're relevant? I think the buildings are older than claimed. I think they were designed for a specific purpose that we don't understand. And I think that original purpose, whatever it was, created environmental conditions that supported health and survival in ways that standard buildings don't. And you think the government knows this? I think the government has known it for a long time. I think that's why they track people born in these buildings. Because being born in that environment during that critical developmental period might have effects. Lasting effects. Effects they want to monitor and study. He closed the folder. I tried to publish my follow-up research. No journal would accept it. I tried to present at conferences. My abstracts were rejected. I tried to get grant funding to continue the work. Every application was denied. And then you lost your position. And then I lost my position. The official reason was failure to maintain research standards consistent with institutional expectations. The real reason was that I'd found something someone didn't want found. He let me copy his research. Hundreds of pages of architectural analysis, statistical modeling, comparative studies, all of it pointing to the same conclusion. These hospitals were different, in ways that affected human development, and someone had been monitoring those effects for a very long time. The CIA's Office of Medical Services was established in 1947. Officially, its purpose was to provide medical support for CIA operations and personnel. But buried in its early organizational documents, available through FOIA, though heavily redacted, there's another mission: continuation of long-term health monitoring programs transferred from military intelligence. Focus on subjects with identified developmental exposure to anomalous environmental factors. Identified developmental exposure to anomalous environmental factors. That's not a description of enemy combatants or foreign agents. That's a description of civilians, Americans, people who were exposed to something unusual during development, meaning before birth or during infancy, like being born in a building with environmental characteristics that shouldn't exist. I found more documents, memos from the 1950s discussing hospital origin protocols, budget allocations for long-term subject monitoring, coordination with the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare regarding medical record access for identified subjects. The program was massive, hundreds of personnel, millions of dollars in annual budget, ongoing for decades, and completely classified. Not a single document I found actually explained what they were monitoring for, or why. Just bureaucratic references to protocols, subjects, monitoring, coordination. The substance was always redacted, the explanations were always classified. I found a memo from 1963, CIA to FBI, subject, hospital origin, subject, deceased. Most of it was blacked out, but 3 paragraphs survived. Subject 4821 died February 12, 1963, cause of death, natural causes, cardiac arrest. Subject was 78 years old, born Allegheny General Hospital, Pittsburgh, 1885. Subject demonstrated typical health markers observed in hospital origin cohort. Longevity 12% above national average for birth year. Disease resistance markers 34% above baseline. No unusual health incidents requiring intervention. Tissue samples obtained through standard autopsy protocols. Transferred to Fort Detrick for analysis per standing authorization. Family unaware of government interest. Tissue samples transferred to Fort Detrick, the military's biological research facility, from a civilian who died of natural causes because he'd been born in a specific hospital 78 years earlier. I found dozens of similar memos, subjects dying, tissue samples obtained, analysis conducted, all classified, all without the family's knowledge or consent. The government was harvesting tissue from dead Americans, not suspected criminals, not enemy agents, just people who happened to be born in certain buildings. What were they looking for? I attempted to file a Freedom of Information Act request, specifically about the tissue sample program. Denied. Records pertaining to medical research programs are exempt under national security provisions and privacy protections. I appealed, citing the deceased status of the subjects and the public interest in understanding government medical research. Denied. Continued classification necessary to protect ongoing research programs and intelligence sources and methods. Ongoing research programs. More than 50 years later, they're still studying tissue samples from people born in these hospitals more than a century ago, still finding something worth protecting with classification, still refusing to explain what. Cook County Hospital, Chicago. The old building was replaced in 2002, but the original structure stood for more than a century before demolition. I found photographs of the demolition, watched video footage of the wrecking balls taking it down, floor by floor. In one photograph, taken as they exposed the basement levels, you can see something unusual. The basement walls are extraordinarily thick, at least 4 feet of solid stone, far thicker than necessary for a late 19th century hospital. And in the debris visible in high-resolution photographs, there are metal fragments, pipes or conduits, made of a copper alloy, running through the walls in complex patterns, not water pipes, not gas lines, something else. A structural engineer I showed the photographs to was puzzled. Those conduits don't match anything I recognize from 19th century construction. The alloy composition, the manufacturing technique, the layout pattern, it's sophisticated, more sophisticated than it should be. How sophisticated? Put it this way. If you told me these were from a 1940s building, I'd find it plausible. From the 1880s, it doesn't fit. The demolition was conducted under unusual circumstances. The site was closed to public observation. Debris was removed immediately, trucked to undisclosed locations, rather than dumped in standard construction waste facilities. The entire process was completed in 6 weeks, much faster than normal for a building that size, as if someone wanted it taken apart quickly, quietly, before too many people could see what was inside the walls. I tried to find out where the debris was taken, filed requests with the Chicago Department of Buildings, the contractor company, the waste management firms involved. No records, or rather, records that showed the debris going to licensed disposal facilities without specifying which ones. The building was demolished, the materials vanished, the evidence destroyed, but not before someone photographed those conduits. Those impossible, sophisticated metal patterns running through walls that were supposedly built in 1880, Jefferson Hospital, Philadelphia. Still operating though heavily renovated over the years, I obtained access through a former employee, a maintenance supervisor named Dennis Kowalski, who'd worked there for 37 years before retiring in 2015. "You want to see the old basements?" he asked when I contacted him. "Why?" "I'm researching the building's history. I think it's older than the official records claim." He laughed. "Yeah, a lot older. We met near the hospital." He couldn't get me inside anymore. He'd turned in his access badges when he retired, but he had photographs, hundreds of them, taken over his decades of working in the building. "I documented everything," he said. "Started in the 80s when I realized what I was seeing didn't match what I was being told about the building's age." He showed me photographs of the sub-basements, 3 levels below the main basement, accessible only through locked maintenance corridors. The walls were stone, precisely cut, fitted without mortar. The floors were some kind of composite material that looked almost like terrazzo but harder, more durable. "That's not 19th century construction," he said. "That's not even 20th century. I don't know what it is, but it's old, really old, and it's still in perfect condition. No deterioration, no settling. Like it was built to last forever." He showed me photographs of chambers that had been sealed with brick walls. These are all over the sub-basements. Entire rooms, entire corridors bricked off sometime in the past. Modern brick, maybe from the 1940s or 50s. Behind the brick, I don't know. Nobody knows. Or if they do, they're not saying. Did you ever try to access those sealed areas? Once, in 1993, I got permission from my supervisor to remove a brick wall that was blocking access to what the building plans said was a storage room. We needed this space. What happened? We got 3 bricks removed. Then 2 men in suits showed up, said they were from hospital administration, said we were to stop immediately, rebuild the wall, and never access that area again. Wouldn't explain why, just said it was not authorized for access. Did you rebuild the wall? We did. My supervisor told me later that he'd been contacted by the hospital's legal department, told that certain areas of the sub-basement were under long-term lease to a federal agency and were not to be accessed by hospital personnel under any circumstances. Which agency? He didn't say. Probably didn't know, but areas of a hospital, leased to the federal government, sealed off from the people who work in the building? That's not normal. He showed me more photographs, ventilation shafts that descended farther than the building's documented levels, electrical conduits using wire gauges and insulation types he didn't recognize, acoustic properties in certain chambers that made sound behave strangely, whispers carrying clearly across large distances, loud noises somehow dampened. "This building is a mystery," he said, "and someone has gone to a lot of trouble to make sure it stays a mystery. The sealed areas, the federal lease, the restrictions on someone doesn't want people exploring the original structure. Why? Because it would raise questions. Questions about when it was really built, what it was built for, who built it. And those are questions someone decided shouldn't be asked." I started mapping the hospitals. All of them. Every facility mentioned in the fragmented CIA documents. Every building with the architectural anomalies. Every site with unusual infant survival rates during the 1880-1930 period. 47 hospitals across the United States. And when I plotted them on a map, I saw the pattern. They weren't randomly distributed. They formed a network, roughly equidistant from each other, as if placed according to a specific geographic plan. The spacing was too regular to be coincidental. Approximately 250 miles between facilities in most cases, like nodes in a network, like stations along a route, like a system designed to provide coverage across a large geographic area. But a system for what? I measured the distances more precisely, used GIS software to calculate exact spacing, elevation, geographic coordinates. The pattern was even more precise than I'd initially realized. The hospitals were positioned at specific elevations, following geographic contours in ways that seemed deliberate. Several were positioned on elevated ground overlooking water. Several were at natural crossroads or transportation hubs. Several were at what would have been the geographic centers of their regions in the 19th century, strategic positions, optimal locations for something. I showed the maps to a friend who'd worked in military logistics, asked him what the pattern looked like to him. "Distribution network," he said immediately. "Like you designed for communications, supply chain, or population monitoring." You'd want coverage across a wide area, but you'd want the nodes close enough to support each other. The spacing 200 to 250 miles, that's about right for a network, designed in an era before modern transportation. Far enough apart to cover large regions, close enough to maintain coordination. What would they be coordinating? No idea. But this wasn't random, this was planned. Carefully planned by someone who understood network design and geographic optimization. In the 1880s, that's the weird part. This level of network planning, this precision in geographic placement, you don't usually see it until the mid-20th century. Military communications networks, interstate highway planning, that kind of thing, not hospital construction in the 19th century. Unless the hospitals were part of something bigger, something that already existed. Yeah, he said quietly. Unless that, the birth records themselves contain anomalies. I started examining them closely. Thousands of certificates from the identified hospitals, from the 1880-1930 period, comparing them to birth records from other hospitals in the same cities, from the same years. The differences were subtle but consistent. Birth certificates from the identified hospitals were more detailed. They included measurements and observations that weren't standard for the era, precise birth weights to the ounce, exact birth times to the minute. Physical measurements, head circumference, body length, chest circumference, recorded with precision that exceeded normal medical practice of the period. And in the corner of many certificates, there was a small notation, a code, alphanumeric sequences that didn't appear on birth certificates from other hospitals. I found a certificate from Allegheny General, 1903H, AG 0347, in small print in the lower right corner. Cook County Hospital, 1897, CC 0891. F. Jefferson Hospital, 1915, H. J. H. 1247. M. The pattern was consistent, H presumably for hospital, or possibly the surname of whoever implemented the system, the hospital's initials, a sequential number, and M or F for gender. These codes appeared on approximately 73% of birth certificates from the identified hospitals. The remaining 27% had no code. Why code some births and not others? What determined which babies received the notation? I compared the coded certificates to the non-coded ones, looking for any pattern, any distinguishing characteristic. I found one. Babies with the code notation had consistently higher birth weights, averaged 7.8 pounds compared to 6.9 pounds for non-coded babies. They had lower rates of complications, lower rates of infant mortality, higher survival rates through the first year of life. They were healthier, measurably, statistically, significantly healthier, and someone was marking them, tracking them, creating a database of unusually healthy babies born in specific buildings, a database that the CIA inherited in 1947 and continued maintaining for the next 70 years. I tried to access modern hospital birth records to see if the coding continued after 1930. The identified hospitals, the ones still operating, refused my requests. Birth records are protected health information, not available to researchers without specific authorization and consent. I tried going through state health departments, requesting aggregate data that wouldn't identify individuals, just statistics on birth outcomes, coding practices, record-keeping standards, denied in every state. Birth records are confidential. Aggregate data cannot be released without authorization from the relevant healthcare facilities. I tried using my own birth certificate as leverage. I was born in 1982 in a regular hospital, not one of the identified facilities. I requested my complete birth records, including any coding or notions. My birth certificate had no unusual codes, no special notations, just standard information, name, date, time, weight, parents' information. I had a friend request her birth records. She'd been born in Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, one of the identified facilities in 1979. Her birth certificate had a notation in the corner, HMG 9847F. The coding had continued, at least into the 1970s, possibly to the present day. Babies born in these specific hospitals were still being marked, tracked, coded into a database that someone, somewhere, was maintaining. Dr. Sarah Vance, geneticist, had her NIH research grant terminated in 2008. I found her through academic papers on population genetics and environmental health factors. She'd been studying heritable health traits and trying to identify environmental influences on genetic expression. She'd published preliminary findings suggesting that environmental exposure during gestation and early infancy could have lasting effects on health outcomes that resembled genetic inheritance but weren't actually genetic. Her grant was terminated. Her research was deemed not sufficiently aligned with NIH priorities. She was working at a private biotech company when I contacted her, initially reluctant to discuss her terminated research but willing to talk off the record. I was finding patterns that didn't make genetic sense, she told me. Clusters of people with similar health characteristics, longevity, disease resistance, healing rates, who weren't genetically related. No family connection, no ethnic correlation. But they shared something environmental, where they were born. She looked at me sharply. How did you know that? Because I found the same pattern. She pulled out data on her laptop. I identified 847 subjects who showed the health pattern I was tracking. Longevity 15.20% above average. Cancer rates 40% below average. Cardiovascular disease 35% below average. Healing rates measurably faster. Disease resistance significantly higher. And they were all born in specific hospitals. 73% of them were born in a cluster of about 40 hospitals across the US, all constructed in roughly the same era, 1870s through 1890s. All with similar architectural characteristics. The correlation was too strong to be coincidental. What did you conclude? I concluded that the buildings themselves, the physical environment during gestation and early development, were affecting health outcomes in ways that persisted across entire lifetimes. Some characteristic of the structures, something about the materials or design or environmental conditions, was influencing human development. Did you determine what that characteristic was? No. I tried to get access to the buildings to conduct environmental studies, measure electromagnetic properties, acoustic characteristics, material composition, air quality, anything that might explain the effect. Every hospital refused my requests, said it wasn't relevant to patient care, and they couldn't accommodate research that might disrupt operations. And then your grant was terminated. And then my grant was terminated. 2 weeks after I filed my last round of access requests. The official reason was shift in research priorities. The real reason was that I'd found something someone didn't want studied. Did you ever determine who was blocking you? No, but after my grant was terminated, I was contacted by 2 men who said they were from HHS Health and Human Services. They wanted to discuss my research. Specifically, they wanted my data, the subject list, the hospital identifications, the health measurements. Did you give it to them? No. I told them the research was my intellectual property and I wasn't obligated to share it. They said it would be in my best interest to cooperate. Said there were national security implications to my findings. I told them to get a subpoena if they wanted my data. Did they? No. Instead, my employment contract at NIH wasn't renewed. My research was classified as sensitive and locked away. I was told I couldn't publish it, couldn't reference it, couldn't continue it. If I violated that restriction, I'd face federal charges for mishandling classified research. They classified your research after the fact, retroactively, classified it. Everything I'd done, all my data, all my findings, suddenly it was a national security issue, and I was told to never speak about it again. She looked at me steadily. I'm violating that restriction by talking to you. If they find out, I could be prosecuted. But I'm tired of sitting on the truth while people deserve to know that the government has been monitoring and studying them for their entire lives without consent. I decided to attempt my own environmental study of one of the identified hospitals. I couldn't get official access, but I could measure from outside electromagnetic fields, acoustic properties, radiation levels, anything detectable from public spaces adjacent to the building. I chose Allegheny General in Pittsburgh. Set up equipment in a public park across the street. Spent 3 days taking measurements. The electromagnetic readings were unusual. The building emitted a low-frequency electromagnetic field, approximately 7.83 Hz. That was stronger than the ambient background. Not dangerously strong, just present, consistent. Like the building itself was generating or amplifying this specific frequency. 7.83 Hz is significant. It's the Schumann resonance, the frequency of electromagnetic waves in the cavity between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. It's sometimes called the Earth's heartbeat. The building was resonating at the Earth's natural frequency. That's not something that happens by accident. That requires specific materials, specific construction techniques, specific design. You don't get that from standard 19th century hospital construction. You get it from intentional engineering, from understanding electromagnetic properties and biological effects, from building structures designed to create and maintain specific frequencies. I took acoustic measurements. The building's exterior walls reflected sound in unusual patterns. Certain frequencies were absorbed. Others were amplified. The pattern suggested sophisticated acoustic engineering, much more sophisticated than you'd expect from a structure supposedly built in 1886. I was packing up my equipment on the 3rd day when 2 men approached me. They showed credentials, Department of Homeland Security. "What are you measuring?" one asked. "Electromagnetic fields." Acoustic properties, environmental research. Why this building specifically? Historical architecture project. I'm studying construction techniques from the late 19th century. They looked at each other, then back at me. You need to cease this activity and leave the area. This building is protected infrastructure. Unauthorized surveillance or measurement is prohibited. I'm on public property. I'm not doing anything illegal. The building is classified as critical infrastructure under federal protection. Your activities could be construed as surveillance for hostile purposes. We're ordering you to cease immediately and surrender your equipment for review. I refused, cited my rights, said I'd contact a lawyer. They confiscated my equipment anyway, told me I was being documented as a potential security concern, warned me that continued interest in protected facilities would result in federal charges. I never got the equipment back, but I'd already uploaded my data to the cloud. The measurements were saved, the evidence preserved. A hospital built supposedly in 1886 is critical infrastructure under federal protection. Measuring it from public property is surveillance for hostile purposes. Why? What are they protecting? What are they hiding? I found references to the hospital monitoring program in unexpected places. A congressional budget document from 1973, discussing classified intelligence programs, continuation of long-term health surveillance program, initiated 1947. Subject count, 8,400. And 32 primary, 127,000 descendant monitoring. Annual budget $4.7 million. An internal CIA memo from 1985 discussing facility security, recommend enhanced physical security for identified hospital facilities. Public awareness of historical significance could compromise ongoing research programs. A Department of Energy document from 1991 discussing environmental research, coordination with CIA Office of Medical Services regarding environmental exposure studies. Hospital origin subjects provide valuable long-term health data for baseline comparisons. These weren't conspiracy theories. These were official government documents, acknowledging that they were tracking people based on where they were born, studying their health outcomes, protecting the buildings they were born in, and doing all of it in secret for decades. And when I tried to FOIA the full context for any of these references, I got the same response every time: continued classification, necessary to protect intelligence sources and methods, and ongoing research programs. Ongoing research programs, still active, still studying people who were born in these buildings more than a century ago, still refusing to explain why. I attempted one final access to records. I filed a FOIA request with the National Archives for any documents related to hospital construction in America from 1870-1900, specifically requested building permits, architectural records, and any federal involvement in hospital construction during that period. I received a partial release, heavily redacted. But in one document, a report from the Army Corps of Engineers from 1892, I found something revealing. The Corps had conducted a survey of large institutional buildings of uncertain origin in American cities. The survey listed 42 buildings, including all of the hospitals I'd identified. The report noted they were of superior construction quality, suggesting federal or military origin, but that no federal records exist documenting their construction. The report concluded, recommend federal acquisition or oversight of these facilities, given their strategic value and unknown provenance. Origin and construction methodology remain classified pending further investigation. Origin and construction methodology remain classified. In 1892, the federal government knew these buildings existed, knew they didn't know who built them, and classified that information. Classified the fact that dozens of large institutional buildings in American cities were of unknown provenance. Classified the mystery of their origin. Classified the investigation into who built them and when, and maintained that classification for more than 130 years. There are questions I can't answer. Who built these hospitals? When were they actually constructed? What were they? Why do they affect human health? What property of the buildings creates the measurable benefits to infant survival and long-term well-being? Why has the government been tracking people born in these buildings for 77 years? What are they monitoring for? What do they expect to find? What's in the sealed basement levels? Why are certain areas leased to federal agencies and kept off limits even to hospital staff? Why code certain babies and not others? What determines which children receive the notation and lifelong monitoring? What happened to the tissue samples taken from deceased subjects? What did the analysis at Fort Detrick reveal? And the question that haunts me most, how many other aspects of American infrastructure that we think we built are actually inherited from a civilization we've been taught to forget? I don't have answers. The answers are classified, locked in archives I can't access, protected by layers of secrecy that have been maintained across multiple generations. But the questions matter, the pattern matters, the evidence matters, even if it has to be shared quietly, even if asking these questions publicly means confiscated equipment and federal attention and career destruction. Even if the truth is dangerous. I stood outside Allegheny General Hospital one last time, looking up at the weathered stone facade. Somewhere in that building, in basement levels I'm not allowed to see, there's evidence of who really built it and why. There are sealed chambers holding secrets the government has protected for over a century. There are systems still functioning, still affecting the health of people born within these walls, still creating measurable benefits we're not supposed to notice or question. And somewhere in federal databases there's a file on every person born in this building between 1880 and 1930, their health records, their descendants, their entire lives documented and studied without their knowledge or consent. Margaret Dennison is 97 years old. She's been monitored for 97 years, tracked, studied, her medical records requested at every official interaction, and she still doesn't know why. Thousands of others like her, some aware of the unusual attention, most not, all of them marked from birth, for reasons that remain classified. I thought about the babies born in this building today, whether they're still being coded, still being added to databases, still being marked for lifelong monitoring by agencies they'll never know are watching. I thought about the sophistication of the original construction, the electromagnetic properties, the acoustic engineering, the network of 47 facilities positioned with geometric precision across the continent, infrastructure that shouldn't exist, built by people we're not allowed to acknowledge, for purposes that remain hidden. The wind moved through the trees around the hospital. The building sat solid and ancient, its stones dark with a century of weathering, its foundations extending deep into the earth, where no one is allowed to look. How many people have been born within these walls? How many lives have been shaped by whatever this place really is? How many families have been marked and monitored across generations? And why? The answer is classified. The investigation is ongoing. The monitoring continues. But the building stands, patient, waiting, still affecting the health of everyone born within it, still resonating at 7.83 Hertz, the Earth's heartbeat, in ways that shouldn't be possible for a structure supposedly built in 1886. The truth is in those sealed basements, in those classified files, in those tissue samples at Fort Detrick, in the medical records of nearly 1 million Americans who don't know they're being studied. The truth is there, hidden, protected, deliberately obscured, but it exists. Look at your birth certificate. See if there's a code in the corner. Check which hospital you were born in. Notice if you've had unusual medical monitoring throughout your life. Ask yourself if the government has shown more interest in your health than seems normal. And if you find that code, if you were born in one of these buildings, if you've experienced the pattern, know that you're not imagining it. Know that you're part of something larger, something that began long before you were born, something that's been classified and protected and hidden for reasons someone decided you shouldn't understand. The hospitals remember. The files remember. The monitoring continues. Even if we've been taught not to ask why, even if the answers remain locked away, even if knowing the truth means joining the list of people who've had their careers destroyed for asking the wrong questions, the pattern is real. The monitoring is real. The buildings are older than they claim. And somewhere, someone knows exactly why that matters. They're just not telling. The sun set behind Allegheny General Hospital. The stone facade glowed briefly in the last light, then faded to shadow. Inside, babies were being born, being measured, being coded, being added to databases that will track them for their entire lives, just like they've been doing since at least 1880, just like they'll keep doing until someone finally demands to know why. The building stood silent, keeping its secrets, holding its mysteries, waiting,